This series of author interviews is brought to you by Leisure Press and the Book Reality Experience, turning writers' dreams into book realities.
Hi everybody and welcome to Book Realities, our series of interviews with authors, and today we're joined by Dean Buswell, author of The Order of Elysium, the first in a trilogy of urban fantasy novels. Hi Dean, thanks for joining us. How are you?
Hey Ian, I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
No worries. For anybody that doesn't know about Dean Buswell, or indeed hasn't read your books yet, what is The Order of Elysium all about?
Order of Elysium is a urban fantasy. It's about angels and demons and the Order of Elysium that has been raised by the angels to defend humanity against their war. But as you go deeper in, it's actually about, the human side of the Order of Elysium and the challenges they have to face as being essentially still human.
Fantastic. And as a human, what about Dean Buswell then? What do you do when you're not writing? What are you up to? Where do you live? Tell us all about yourself.
I live in Australia, Western Australia. I'm a gamer. I'm into all kinds of different games. I'm very eclectic like that, but I've also recently gotten into Dungeons and Dragons, which is a time pit as in and of itself. I'm a security officer by day. I manage a site local to me.
And that job as a security officer assisted you in actually writing your first book, didn't it?
It did, yeah. Before I became a manager, I used to do shift work, and I did a lot of night shifts and weekends. So I had a bit of free time, and when I was able to, I could do a bit of work on that.
And although we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, obviously I said that it was a trilogy. So the second book, when you released the first one, you told me that the second one would be hot on its heels, but actually your family circumstances changed somewhat, didn't they?
Yeah, a little bit. I originally planned a year for at least getting the draft all done up. I released Order of Elysium 2 years ago. I had all these plans about marketing. I was going to do all this, all the footwork for going to brand bookstores and stuff like that. Very excited. But then my wife walked in and gave me the news of our daughter on the way. So my priorities shifted a little bit, and my plans for my book kind of, to say they took a backseat is a bit of an understatement.
So your priorities completely shifted, and
Yeah.
the last 2 years, rather than producing the second book, have been playing. The last video I saw on your social medias was playing bubbles with her, I think, which seemed a lot more exciting than writing fantasy thrillers, but there you go.
Yeah, definitely.
Very good. So when you were a little boy, did you always want to be a writer at some point, or did this come along later?
Well, as a kid, I was very interested in fantasy, and that generally kind of always came back to writing and just ideas about writing. And even as I was as a kid, year seven, which would have been I think 12, I was put into a course for writing for kids who needed a bit of an extra challenge at school. So that was really a bit of a push there, and I've always been interested in. But it's only to the most recent years that I really pushed as to something that I really wanted to do on a more professional sort of level.
So when you got to that point and you decided to embark on the Order of Elysium, where did you get the idea from? Even though you're grounded in gaming and you're grounded in fantasy, regardless of the medium, to come up with a band of humans that assist angels is a leap. So where did that come from?
Well, it's interesting because my focus on fantasy was high fantasy, dwarves and elves and that sort of thing. But the idea for Order of Elysium actually came from my love of like mythology, in particular Norse mythology. And in Norse mythology, there's these things called Inheritor, and they are best of the best warriors picked out by the Valkyrie upon their deaths, and they're brought up to Valhalla to fight and train until the end of the world comes along. So I sort of took this idea of these hand-picked warriors and brought them into a like a modern setting.
That's fantastic. And have you kept certain traits from those Valkyrie warriors, or have you completely transformed them, or have you taken the core of them and dropped them into the modern day?
I've taken that as its core idea and then just added in mythology all over the place from, Greek and the more modern stuff like Christian texts and things like that. Obviously, because angels and demons. So it comes from elements from everywhere.
Fantastic. And how long, we've spoken about the second book being delayed due to little Buswell running around, but how long did it take you from the opening idea to presenting it in draft for first edit to us?
That's book one, 5 years total.
That's not bad,
Um,
considering that was being written part-time while you were doing night shifts, etc.
well, I mean, the first three and a half years or so was actually just while I was not even serious about it. It was only until me and my wife got together and she read it and she really liked it and she sort of pushed me to do it. And it's only when it was finished, you know, 2 years later that, I realized that it's something I actually wanted to do.
So when you said that your wife gave you the encouragement, was that because you'd been writing it, but you were not convinced it was good enough to become a book, or was it that you were shy about showing it to anybody else, or what held you back?
I think it was a bit of both and just sort of knowing how much work would actually go into it. And I didn't really know that I wanted to put that work into it for something that I didn't think would actually do that well.
And when you sent it in to us, we initially, with the first three chapters of the submission, we thought it had a huge amount of merit, but we obviously knew that you had to work with an editor. So what was that process like, working with an editor, which I think lasted for about 6 to 9 months? It was an extended period, yeah?
As a first time author, especially working with an editor is something that not a lot of authors really can get into because it's so confronting having someone look at your book and tear it apart. But ultimately, the editor was her expertise and her knowledge, and the way she conveyed that to me was very encouraging.
So your editor
Um,
was Juliet Lachmeyer,
yes,
yeah?
that's right. Yeah. And the way she sort of explained everything to me, she didn't just say, this needs changing because I say so. It was this needs changing and this is why. And it was more of a conversation about how to improve my book rather than, and someone coming along and ripping it to pieces. So it was a surprisingly positive experience, and I'm very glad I did it.
Well, I must admit, the proof of it was when we all turned up at Supernova in Perth just this year. And for someone who thought that their book might not do too well, how many did you? I mean, you were going through quite a lot of quill ink signing your books off during the morning and afternoon sessions.
Yeah, well, that was a very surreal experience. To my surprise, it went really well. I sold everything I bought, I sold out except for 4 copies, which I actually sold in person a couple of days later.
Very good. And one of the things about Supernova that definitely stood out for me was the attractiveness of the cover simply by being a lure for people to come over and ask questions about the book. So that idea of don't judge a book by a cover is nonsense because that's
It is.
exactly what
Yeah.
people do. But your cover is on spot for your genre. It's a very striking image. So again, where did that come from? Where did the ideas come from? How did that come about?
Well, that actually is, I did more clinical research into, my genre, what people sort of subconsciously expect and what they subconsciously receive from what they see on a cover. I worked with Lily Dormashev. She was the one who designed the cover. I worked with her and, said, I want these elements. It's an urban fantasy, so I want some sort of skyline in the background. The angel, an obvious element. That's really what it came down to.
It certainly worked for Supernova when people were coming over to shift all of the books that you had brought, bar four, is no mean feat for any author at any festival. But with Supernova, with so much to see and do, with so much passing foot traffic, to be able to get them across to your venue is remarkable, and then to have them engage with the book, read the back of the book, and then buy that book was all very good. It also helped that you had a really nice quirk when it came to signing. What was your quirk?
That I had a actual feather quill, like in ink pot and everything. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it was perfect for the festival that it was.
I think that alone, having that on the desk, sort of caught a lot of people's eyes too.
So, with regards to people engaging with the book, what's the best feedback you've had since you've published it?
Um, I think it's going to sound strange, but I think when people get mad at me is the best feedback I get. When they're angry that I've done something terrible to one of their favorite characters, because it tells me that I've done my job in getting them emotionally attached to those characters. So that's probably my best feedback.
And I've also noticed regarding the characters that people are really invested in them. So there's been some good social media interaction where you've used an AI engine to create the characters.
Yeah, it's a site called Art Breeder. It's very fiddly, but you can get a very good idea if you spend quite a bit of time tweaking all the little settings, and you're never going to get it perfectly accurate to what you've got in your head. But I've posted a picture of Asha so far, and she's pretty spot on to what I had in my head, of course. But everyone's going to have different ideas.
Occasionally, writers tell me that yes, people get invested in their characters, but they also tell me that even though they've invented the characters, even though they wrote them and they're not going insane, but sometimes the characters have surprised them with where they've taken the plot off to or what they've decided to do within the story. Has that happened to yourself?
Yeah, that's actually it's a very strange phenomenon. And talking to non-writers about that is you do look a little crazy. But yeah, definitely. You kind of you're in, especially when you're in the zone when you're writing and you've got you've stepped into their shoes to write their scene and you're thinking the way they think. You're trying to feel the way they would feel. And then all of a sudden you're writing something that you didn't plan and it just sort of takes a mind of its own. And like that sounds really strange if you're not a writer, but that's exactly what happens.
I find that when characters decide to go off on their own and do stuff, you just kind of have to follow them and hang on to their coattails and hope that they end up somewhere that you can write them out of.
Yeah, and you don't always find yourself in that position where you can write yourself. You sometimes write yourself into a corner, and that can sometimes be a good thing because you can then see things from a different angle that you didn't quite expect that you would go.
So you put them into a problem area and then you have to figure out how to get them out of it, but staying within their character traits.
Yeah, that's right.
Excellent stuff. So when you said that you did a lot of research for the book, what was the most surprising or interesting thing that you discovered that you hadn't known about previously?
What I found out, and this is something it's always intrigued me that a lot of mythologies have a lot of through lines, despite certain cultures being so far removed. There are quite a few stories and quite a few ideas that they have in common, which makes it very easy to base, stories off of because they sort of write themselves.
Now that you're a manager then, and the second book's coming along, which we should name, by the way, what's the second book called?
The Vaults of Erebus,
The Vaults of Erebus. What's the actual trilogy series called?
the Etheric Wars trilogy.
And where did you come up with that title from?
I honestly can't remember. Etheric is just sort of, it's an angelic sounding word, so it seemed to fit.
Now that it's in the process of being written, what's your writing schedule like? Are you managing to fit in 5 hours a day?
I wish. What I'm sort of focusing on at the moment is restructuring what I've already written. I've gotten most of the draft done, but I was sort of struggling how to finish it. So I'm able to spend a bit of time at home just looking at what I've written, rereading it, and thinking, okay, this scene actually needs to go here, and to make it flow better. So when I'm at home, I can spend 30 minutes working on that.
So, what advice would you give to writers starting out then with regards to fitting that writing in around a busy family and work schedule?
As hard as it is sometimes, even for someone who's been doing it for a while, don't wait for inspiration. inspiration isn't always going to be there, and if you wait for it, you're never going to finish, and you can't edit a blank page. Your first draft is going to be terrible. Well, I mean, not terrible, but it's not going to be the best it can be. And no matter how many times you go over that one line that you're stuck on, it's not going to change it at the end. You're going to have to come back anyway. So you might as well write terribly and then come back and fix it, because otherwise you're just going to bog yourself down and you're never going to finish.
But when you do finish and you do get a book out and you go to the likes of Supernova and you sell and sign lots of them, what's the best feeling that you've had with regards to your book?
My best feeling actually was well before then, and that was when you gave me my first physical copy of my book. That was sort of a validation of all the effort and time I'd spent on it, to actually see it, that it was real, that it was something that was actually going to happen. That was probably my favorite moment so far in my journey.
Fantastic. And why did you decide, and this is not me being egotistical by the way, why did you decide to come to a small publisher?
Well, I had done a bit of reading up on, traditional publishing and what they would call self-publishing. And traditional publishing scared me, to be honest. I didn't want to, you hear those stories about even the famous authors today getting rejected a million times. And I'm like, I don't think I had the energy to do that. And even if I did, I didn't want to have to essentially give up my rights to a company, my intellectual property to a company, and have little say and little royalties for that. And then I looked at self-publishing, and self-publishing sort of just looks like a mess. Like anyone could just write what they wanted and publish it up there. And I didn't want my work that I had actually put a lot of effort into to come across as something that was unpolished. So someone put me onto you guys, and you explained to me what independent publishing was, the hybrid, the middle ground for those two things, where I could keep my rights over my intellectual property, and I would still be able to get the assistance and the help that I would need, that I would get from a traditional publisher, and then some, as you've shown.
I think that's a perfect explanation, by the way, because you're right. The old traditional model still works. Obviously, it still works, but you don't have to be a good writer to get traditionally published. You have to be lucky. And the old-fashioned version of self-publishing, you definitely didn't have to be a good writer to get published, because you could publish any old stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas we've moved into that middle ground of independence, where you will employ an editor, you will employ a graphics designer, you will make your product the best it can be. And it's also your product, your intellectual property, and your royalty rates are through the roof in comparison to the traditional model. So well done, you. Okay, so thanks ever so much for your time today. But before we go, if you're up for our Book Realities version of the Actor Studio questionnaire, you okay for 15 quickfire questions?
Yeah, I'll give them a go.
Fantastic. So, Dean Buswell, author of The Order of Elysium, what is your favourite book?
The King Killer Chronicles. Patrick Rothfuss.
And your least favourite book, if you have one?
I don't have one.
What turns you on?
What gets me motivated is being amongst a creative environment such as Supernova, and being around my friends and family.
And conversely, what turns you off?
Having to go to work.
Yeah. Summer or winter?
Winter.
And on a completely free day to do anything you want, who do you spend it with?
My wife, Lisa, and my daughter.
Mountains or oceans?
Mountains.
What is your favourite movie?
The Longest Yard.
The original or the remake?
The Adam Sandler one.
Okay. One song to listen to for the rest of your life?
Diary of Jane by Breaking Benjamin.
Okay. Who makes you laugh the most?
My daughter.
What smell do you love?
Petrichor. the smell of fresh rain on the road.
Okay. And what smell do you hate?
Probably like diesel fumes, like carbon monoxide sort of smell.
Other than a writer, what profession would you like to attempt?
Software engineer or game designer, so computer scientist in some
And what profession would you not like to attempt?
chef.
And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you rock up at the gates?
Still waiting on book two. Get back down there and start writing.
Well, hopefully it's not going to be that soon.
Hopefully not.
I did think you might say, "Oh, the Order of Elysium's over there. You can sign up tomorrow." Hey Dean, thanks ever so much for answering those questions for us and taking the time out of your day. I hope that you can have a fantastic last effort to get the second book, The Vaults of Erebus, out. But, you know, your daughter, she's much more fun to be playing with and the bubbles, etc. So I can see why you might get distracted. But thanks for taking the time.
Don't worry, she'll be old enough that she'll be badgering me as well. So, but yeah, thank you for having me.
No worries.
Hi, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more readings and author interviews. And don't forget to hit that button to be notified every time we post new content.